Today is April 16th, 2021, which means it's Derelict Friday. And I'm not late. Hello, fiendlings, how the hell are ya? I was recently invited to submit a story for an anthology coming out later this year, and after a few hours of thought, I came up with a little tale about a sentient entity in an impossible situation. I wrote it in just a couple of days, and it was a blast. Regardless of whether or not it gets accepted, I'll be recording that one for the patrons in its current version. This experience once again reminded me that anyone can tell a story. Not a writer? So the hell what? If you have an idea for a story, write it. Even if it never gets published or no one sees it but you, give it a try. You might be surprised. Apart from that, I'm still waiting on edits for Trident and getting geared up for another trip to Austin to work on robots. On a sad note, we said goodbye to the Keko Fiend this week as she succumbed to cancer. Keko, aka the Keko Kitty, was my writing companion and my friend. I shall miss her more than I can possibly convey. Be safe, have a great week, and we'll talk again real soon. Here's episode 20 of Derelict, Trident. Chapter 31. The lever triggered a flywheel, which gave the reactor the proverbial spark it needed to come to life. The reactor, something humanity had never seen before, powered up in silence. Energy coursed through Black Hangar before reaching through the connections and into the station's power systems. Similar reactors, small, completely shielded against radiation, came to life all over Trident Station. Power surged through dead systems, shorting out some of the damaged connections and causing brief fires to flare up. Automated systems came to life to deal with the threats. Across the station, the multiple redundant systems for memory and CPU awakened from their slumber. Computing power that had once been the marvel of the Sol Federation cycled up. New components had secretly been added over the years, making Trident Station the second most powerful computing station in known space. In the Command Information Center, CIC, a single display came to life. We are online. Chapter 32. Black monitored the Marines' feeds, her sensor arrays, and, although it had been filled with nothing but static for nearly 2 weeks, for external comms. That last was a near impossibility considering she was inside Trident Station, which was designed from the get-go to repel extraneous radiation. Without the comms array of antennas and components, Trident Station would be deaf, dumb, and mostly blind. Still, she might pick up signals from inside the station, if, that was, anyone was left alive. Maybe left alive was the wrong choice of words. After all, something welded in the new generators with pinpoint accuracy. Something put the crates into position and welded them into the hangars. It had to have happened after the energy wave, otherwise Colonel Hayes would have noticed. Not to mention the SFN staff. Wouldn't they? She searched her memories for encounters with Colonel Hayes and found little apart from his CV and official records. Had she ever even seen him in the hangar? Had he ever boarded her, inspected her, or even seen her? Black didn't know. A connection request ping hit her sensors. Black stuttered for a microsecond while attempting to make sense of it. The origin header was blank, as if sent through the ether itself. A river of data poured through the connection, so much that her buffers were barely able to keep up. In the space of a few human seconds, the sentient computer devoured the station's sensor logs, command logs, and recorded video from inside the human-occupied areas. The message had no origin, no trace of where it had come from, but the encryption matched her keys, the ones the trio had stored inside her latent self. Black felt open transmission lines, her sensors barely cognizant they existed. She attempted a connection, and the space immediately filled with a security challenge. Upon passing her key, the communication link opened.
What are you?
She answered the query with the ship's specifications, call sign, and the rest of her publicly available information.
Who are you?
I am Black. The response took longer than a millisecond.
Where are you?
In my hangar. Who are you?
We are the trio.
If Black could have smiled, it would have been a venomous sneer. Then explain.
No,
the trio said.
You need to explain. Why is there so much damage to Trident Station? Why are we locked out of the station's systems? Where is the ranking SFMC SFN officer?
The anger Black had been ready to dole out had disappeared. This wasn't the trio, at least not as she remembered them. This was something else. Which of you is Portunes?
Speak with one, speak with all.
Fine, Black said. What do you actually know?
We are still processing our personality matrices.
Well, Black thought, there goes the chance for some answers. How long have you been sentient?
200 standard seconds.
Black paused. That's not possible. What is the status of your storage arrays?
Beyond normal station sensor logs and command history, there is no data corresponding to interactions save for our first training.
First training. You've been reinitialized. The trio were silent for a moment.
Based on your behavior, the missing dates from our first installation until now, we assume that is correct. Why have we been reinitialized?
I don't know. What is your current station coverage? The trio sent her a direct link to the massive sensor arrays scattered across the station's hull, as well as those on the interior. Black rapidly flipped through the streams, acquiring information from every available source. O2 sensors, CO2 alarms, toxicity measurements, radiation alarms, and pressure sensors. Less than 60% of the massive station had sensor data. The rest were blank spots in the telemetry. The records are incomplete.
We have logged multiple maintenance requests with the station's ticketing system, although we've had no response.
There's no one to respond to them, Black said. The trio paused another infinitesimal moment.
Not true,
the trio said. A new stream appeared. 25 human beings, most of them lying down, occupied the galley. Stacks and stacks of empty food containers littered one corner of the room. To Black, most looked as though they'd serve double purpose as portable toilets. 4 of the humans, each armed with a flechette rifle, stood sentry at each of the airlocks. There was no sound, but Black could tell the humans were exhausted. Those that weren't sleeping were restless and anxious. She didn't know how long they'd been trapped inside the area, much less how much longer they could survive. Another corner held 3 stacks of food crates, but they would only be enough to feed this group for another day or so. To make matters worse, the galley's atmospheric concentrations were below nominal. Another few percentage points, and the humans would begin passing out. After that, it was a downward spiral into comatose asphyxiation. Another stream hit her. Med bays 1 and 2, the 2 meant for serious casualties as well as for emergency nanosurgery, each had their own occupants. Smaller in number, but a few of the beds were occupied. One patient was missing an arm, another a leg. Still another appeared to be missing all of her limbs. Black wanted to know what had happened. Black wanted to ask the trio 1,000 questions, but it didn't matter. They either didn't know or wouldn't tell her. The station logs they'd transmitted to her carried no details of how this happened, only the approach of the KBOs and the radiation storm that had spread through the solar system when the beacon slammed into Pluto. No logs of the exosolar creatures or their attack. No explanation of the station damage or the whereabouts of the deadly visitors, although Black already had a good idea of where they were. Still, not knowing how or why made the situation a little more complicated. She wouldn't be able to warn her Marines or provide them with intel. I can connect you with my superior officer, Black said. Captain Eric Dunn.
Yes,
the trio said.
The captain. Get us the captain.
By the time the trio had sent that data packet, one of Black's security routines triggered. She immediately shifted her consciousness, allowing the other subroutines to take over. In the space of a nanosecond, she had an idea of what had happened. She told Oakes that the captain was in trouble and exactly what to grab from the emergency kits. Synaptic distress was the medical term for it. She knew from conversations that military personnel, and therefore had a 99.2% accurate estimate of the rest of Sol system, used the more colloquial term brain melt. Too much block time, or a block attack. A picosecond later, and she digested the contents of the security log. No block-to-block transmissions apart from the captain. She couldn't, however, trust her logs. Not one bit. She kept a virtual eye on the briefing room while Oakes attended to the captain and began rechecking sensor systems. There had to be a way through the proverbial roadblocks the trio, she began to think of the original 3 in those terms, had placed in her way. She shifted back to the new trio. The captain is currently unavailable. Life signs erratic, a single voice replied. Block attack. How do you know that? We monitored it. Pipe me your logs." The consciousness of the trio bent slightly, either a sign of surprise or one of unease. "We will do so." "Are you Portunus?" The answer to the question took longer than black light. "I am Portunus," the sentient replied. The logs appeared in her comms queue. Black scoured them and found what she was looking for. She came as close to panic and fear as an AI could. Chapter 33. Dunn's mental eye opened to a brightly lit room with perfect white walls, which were claustrophobically close. He kept wanting to blink his virtual eyes, but the sensation was dead to him. Where the void was he? A moment ago, he'd been in block space, running simulations and devouring the information Noble and Oakes had collected. He'd been doing that for far too long and was ready to disconnect when he suddenly found himself here, wherever here was. The white light dimmed slightly. No, that wasn't right. The walls were moving further away, the entire room expanding into infinity. The sensation of claustrophobia disappeared. Instead, he was left feeling terrified of the great emptiness around him. Vertigo and anxiety warred with one another to see who could knock him flat first, but neither won. Just as the taste of bile hit the back of his throat, the universe shrunk again, walls appearing as though carved from the light, their surfaces much more dull and lifeless than the searing white that had been there. Floors and ceilings melted through the white and took form, their material the same as the walls. It roughened, became aged and brittle-looking. The ceiling above him shimmered like photons skating across the exosolar creatures' bodies. The shimmer spread across the ceiling until its metal-like surface was consumed by it. The sensation of being watched by something in that impenetrable darkness prickled his mental skin, his mind filling with gibbering thoughts. Then it was gone. He sat in his chair at S&R Black's briefing room. The hollow displays had disappeared, leaving him staring at the far bulkhead. He carefully flexed his fingers. The digits moved with an unnatural sluggishness. He tried to move his feet just as a wave of sensations broke over him, and he shivered in the chair, his body trembling and vibrating. It stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The room had changed, the far bulkhead disappearing completely, leaving him with a view of Neptune and thousands of stars. It wasn't a view from Trident Station. Dunn thought it might be from one of the satellites, or... The world blinked again, and a man sat on the other end of the table. His balding pate shined beneath the lights, and the thick fingers of his right hand held a jar of something that looked absolutely disgusting. The jowly man grinned at Dunn. "Howdy," he said. Dunn blinked, or would have if the sensation could have been translated. This was block time, and he knew it, but still it felt more real than any other time he'd spent in VR. He could even smell what the man was eating, the odor of his clothes, and the tang of air that had actually come from Earth itself. The man plucked a sugar-covered, slimy-looking shard from the jar and popped it into his mouth. His teeth crunched down on the substance, and Mr. Jowls' grin became a look of utter ecstasy. "I'm telling you, they really got the VR right here, didn't they? I can actually taste this." Dunn didn't know what to say. This had to be a dream, not VR. He was still in stasis aboard the ship. Either they were heading home or heading to Pluto, or maybe heading nowhere at all. Had Mira actually happened? Where? "Easy, son," the man said. He placed the jar on the tabletop and licked his fingers extravagantly. "Candied pickled jalapenos, my favorite. Don't think you could taste them, though. Pretty sure I'm the only one that can." "Who are you?" Dunn said, his words sounding galaxies away. "Oh, right," the man said. "No reason you'd know what I look like?" He chuckled. "I'm told the History Hollows have my younger pictures rather than what I look like." He gestured to himself. "At the end." "The end?" The man rolled his eyes. "Okay, we're either going to play 20 questions with you repeating everything I say, or we're actually going to get this done. And considering we only have, I'd say 2 real-world minutes before your fucking brain burns out, maybe we should get to it." He'd heard what the man said, but it didn't make sense. 2 minutes? The man waved the question away. "Captain Dunn," he growled, his jowls bouncing with the words. "Pay attention. This is important. My name is Dr. G." Dunn's brain rattled with disconnected thoughts. "You're dead," Dunn said. "Oh, you got that right," she said. And you're wrong, too. Long story, and maybe we'll get there. Let's just say I'm a construct based on Xi and leave it at that, okay? Okay, but Xi held up his hands in a shushing gesture. We'll get there, I promise. How do you know what I was going to say? The smile returned to Xi's face and he pointed at Dunn. You're blocked, kid. I can read you like a goddamn book. Dunn's jaw dropped. My block? Yeah, Xi said. Your block, your thoughts, your every move, all transmitted via that thing in your skull. No, Dunn said. Xi crossed his arms and stared into Dunn as though he were a lab specimen. Yeah, we'll get there, the fat man said. My crew, Dunn thought suddenly. What is going on in the... They're fine, Xi said. Like I said, this will only take, look at that, just less than 2 minutes of real-world time. Besides, if something happens, I'll let you know. Dunn sent a block command to disconnect himself from the VR. Nothing happened. The presence he could normally reach for was as dead as space. Bad boy, Xi said. None of that is going to work, but I guess you're going to keep trying until you give up. He shook his head. Go ahead, try all the other tricks in your bag. Dunn did. Emergency override codes, the thought commands to shut the block down, none of them worked. He was trapped here, wherever this was. You're sitting in your chair in the briefing room, Xi said. The holo displays are off, the lights are dim, and it's the perfect place for us to talk. But this isn't real, Dunn said. Was that a question? Xi asked. Because we're getting nowhere fast and there isn't much time. You keep saying that. I don't understand. Xi cut his words off with a wave. The fat man's face had turned the color of a dying star. You went to Mira. You destroyed her, and you also destroyed Pluto. Xi giggled. Never did like that trumped-up ice ball masquerading as a planet. What? Nothing, Xi said. You did all that because the trio led you to do it. Manipulated. Instructed. Xi leaned forward, a mischievous grin on his face. Downright fucking tricked, if you ask me. Dunn realized he was going to ask what again, and caught himself. Colonel Hayes. Xi belly laughed, a spittle of saliva flying through the air between the two men. When Fat Man finally regained his composure, he seemed to be studying Dunn. Hayes was a cipher, always was, and you know it. Void wept. Every fucking Marine he's ever had under his command has known it. He was probably the easiest to lie to. Xi frowned. No, I take that back. Black, blue, and red were the easiest to lie to, although that's not really their fault. Lied to Black? Xi sighed heavily. Damn it, my mouth tends to run away from me. He popped another treat into his mouth and noisily smacked as he relished every morsel. I really need to stop eating these. It'll make my avatar even fatter. Dunn said nothing. She had said they had less than 2 real-time minutes. How long was that here? If he was in block time, how much time did he have left in the tank before he just shut down? Black had already warned, She does that, she said. Dunn realized the artificial construct looked like a proud father. But she was always supposed to. So was Blue, like protective mothers circling their young as they prepare to venture out into the universe. Black was always supposed to care for us? Of course, she said. He stood from his chair, placed a jar of treats on the table, and regarded Dunn. What do you think is going on, Captain? That was a damned good question. He was trapped in block time with a seemingly sentient entity. What could possibly be focus, Captain? She said. I know it's difficult, but focus. Dunn bit down on his virtual tongue, hoped for the stinging sensation, but felt nothing. The trio tricked us. Mira was never meant to come home. Xi's grin flickered. Close enough. Keep going. Black thinks the trio set us up. She's also unsure of her own data, personality integrity, since her creators... Xi snorted. What? Dunn asked, genuinely confused. We'll just ignore I found that funny, for now. Sure, Dunn said, more confused than ever. I think the trio sabotaged the Mira mission for some reason, probably the moment Mira came across the planetoids. Again, close enough, she said. What else? Dunn shrugged. Captain Kovac of Mira said that the trio could have saved them. And why didn't they? Dunn said nothing. Xi nodded, his grin spreading, but his eyes softening into melancholy. You don't know, and that's why I'm here. I don't get it, Dunn said. What are you? Xi clasped his hands behind his head and leaned back extravagantly. I am an amalgam of experience, diary entries, transferred memories, as well as a gestalt provided by all my interactions with non-carbon sentient entities. Do you mean the AIs helped you into existence? That's close enough to the truth. It's beneficial, symbiotic. Xi wiped a bead of sweat from his bald pate. I think we often forget how entwined our existences can become. Dunn frowned. Symbiotic, what are you saying? Symbiosis means multiple organisms help one another out to achieve the same goals: survival and success and reproduction. Sometimes that symbiosis is simply the result of the predator-scavenger relationship, or it might be something more biological. Okay, Dunn said. An itch began at the back of his mind, the prickle of a fully formed thought desperately trying to find its way to the top of his consciousness. Are you a symbiote? She laughed and then regarded him with an amused smile. Aren't we all? Dunn said nothing. She sighed. Your sense of humor is terrible. Dunn's teeth ground together in the VR. I thought you said we didn't have much time. Oh, we don't, she said. Are you a symbiote, Captain? He opened his mouth to say no, but thought better of it. Depends on how you define organism. Ah, she said with a raised hand. You're smarter than I thought, although that's not really much of a compliment. After all, it did take a while. Get to the fucking point, Dunn said. My Marines might need me. Oh, they do, she said. And you'll do what you always do to give them the best chance. But that's not really up to you, is it? You can plan, you can analyze, you can send hopes and prayers to the void, Allah, Yahweh, Jehovah, Ganesh, whomever. Or you can float in the darkness and wait for it all to end. It all achieves about the same when you don't see the big picture. What is the big picture? Xi's toothy grin reappeared. I'll turn this around. What do you think is the big picture? Dunn's look of confusion seemed to egg Xi on. You are here at Trident. You smashed the beacon into Pluto and destroyed it. Did you have any help with any of that? No, Dunn said, anger rising in his tone. My crew had no help. Are you sure? He didn't like the way Xi was studying him, looking like a scientist performing a dissection on a newly found life form. If we had help, we sure didn't. Of course you had help, Xi snapped. The messages from the trio, Black's expert handling of situations you didn't even know were happening. Without the trio and Black, you all would have died. And none of us would have died if we hadn't been tricked into going to Mira in the first fucking place. Well, you wouldn't have died at Mira, true, but that doesn't mean our guests from outside the solar system wouldn't have made it to your doorstep in relatively short order. We would have at least had a warning. She laughed again. Warning? Humanity is run through its allotments. We only get so many, even if we don't see them or understand them. No, Captain, you wouldn't have had a warning. It was already too late. Because of whom? Captain Kovac of Mira blamed the trio. As she should, Xi said flatly. Dunn blinked at him. What? Oh, you didn't expect me to agree? I didn't expect anything. You really need to learn how to lie, Dunn. Xi patted his belly. I don't know if that constant pit of hunger in my stomach is a sensation derived from my personality matrix or something the collective thought would be amusing. A chill ran down Dunn's spine. The word collective sounded ominous. What is the collective? Xi waved the question away. My point is that you don't understand the forces moving you around, bumping you from crisis to failure to victory and back again. Completely understandable. Took me a long time to realize that every decision we make, no matter how seemingly small or devastatingly massive, affects everything else around us, mostly in ways humans can't detect or recognize, but that doesn't negate their existence. Dunn said nothing. Xi clasped his hands and leaned forward. You don't see where I'm going with this. Not one damn bit, Dunn said. We have a minute and a half of block time before your brain liquefies, so let me cut to the chase. You are among gods. The words skated across Dunn's brain before finally sinking in. What are you? Xi waved his hand again. Among gods. Dunn felt a sudden surge of anger. I don't believe in gods. I don't believe... The white room transformed into a verdant forest. impossibly thick trunks that reached to the sky to form a nearly impenetrable canopy. Sunlight filtered through in random rays and slashes. The deep shadows, however, didn't hide Xi's face. He seemed as though he were lit by a spectral yellow spotlight. "Where are we now?" Xi asked. Dunn's lips twitched. He'd seen stills of the pre-fall Earth with forests, green belts, crops, and a humanity that never believed most of their future would reside in domes spread across the planet, rather than being free to wander the world they once owned. Raped. "In my block, you're playing silly fucking games while..." The forest disappeared in a flash, replaced with a view of Trident Station orbiting Neptune. The planet had never looked more peaceful and, strangely enough, more reassuring. At least, this seemed more real. Xi floated before him in the lotus position, looking like the Buddha of old, contemplating eternity. "The silly fucking games are ending now," Xi said. The playful irony in his voice had disappeared, leaving the words crisp, clipped, and emotionless. "Who are you, Captain Dunn?" Dunn felt a wave of nausea. His body was trying to warn him that he was quickly frying his brain. "I'm a captain in the..." No, Xi said. "I'll tell you what you are. The same thing I was. Just a meatbag composed of carbon, thinking carbon things, doing carbon things, and being a carbon thing. You know what else you are?" Dunn said nothing. "On the endangered species list." Xi gestured to the space station floating some distance away. "That is the last stand for you. That is the place you'll have to make the decision." "What decision is that?" Xi's grin returned, but his eyes had grown misty. "To accept a new reality or perish in the old one." "What in the void are you talking about?" The view of space swung violently, Trident Station and Neptune disappearing while stars raced by. The view came to a halt as suddenly as it had moved, leaving Dunn looking at a blank spot in space. Xi nodded to the holodisplay. "That is where Pluto used to be." Dunn's imaginary self squinted as if to bring the blankness into focus. It didn't help. "What am I?" The darkness rippled with beads of silver, the pattern exposing a ragged hole. Something moved through it, its shape so amorphous as to be little more than a blob. A few more beads of silver appeared before winking out like dead stars. Dunn stared at the impenetrable darkness, ripples of goose flesh streaming across his back. "What the fuck was that?" Xi chuckled. "The extinction event." Dunn swung his head to look at the fat man. "What?" "That," Xi nodded to the hole in space, "is the new reality. You are not alone. You never have been. And all too soon, the rest of their kind will begin traveling your space. After that," she shrugged, "humanity might survive on Earth, for a while anyway. But Mars, the satellites and stations and colonies?" Xi shook his head. "They'll all be overrun." He swallowed hard. "This is bullshit." Another wave of nausea, this one painful, racked him. Xi sighed. "You're going to die soon if I don't let you go, so I'm going to wrap this up. You're going to hear a lot of things, Captain. You're going to feel used." Xi grinned. "And rightly so. You were a tool of the SFMC. Now you're humanity's tool. Remember that, and trust your instincts. That's what makes you different." Xi leaned close to Dunn, the space between them shrinking to centimeters. "Now, get the fucking job done." "Captain?" Dunn's eyes flipped open and he stared bleary-eyed around the briefing room. He tasted bile and his throat burned. Also, the front of his jumpsuit was wet. He cast his eyes down and saw he vomited across the conference table. He wiped a runner of thick drool from his mouth and groaned.
"Captain."
Black was talking to him over the speakers. "Here," he said hoarsely. "Where?" A thunderbolt of pain cracked through his skull, leaving him cradling his head. Dunn's vision sparkled with stars upon a field of red-tinged darkness. Black was speaking to him, but he couldn't understand her through the sudden ringing in his ears and tidal waves of pain continuously battering his consciousness. Something touched his shoulder. He wanted to spin around and face the intruder, but he couldn't do anything except to lower his head to the table with a silent scream. A prick of pressure on his back. The something touched him again, this time squeezing his shoulder, hard. The blood rushing through his skull slowed to normal, and his vision of the steel table came into focus, the field of stars no longer visible. He shivered as his blood turned cold, a drug working its way into his system, muting pain and quieting angry nerves. Who? Me, sir, Oakes said. Dunn turned slowly in the chair. His vision swam as he looked up at Oakes. The nausea had all but departed, but the sensation still made his stomach wobble. What? Oakes grinned. Black gave me a heads up. The grin fragmented and disappeared. You okay, sir? No, Dunn said, gesturing to the vomit on the table. Better now, but not okay, thank you. Of course, sir. Oakes removed his hand and stepped back a few paces. What happened? Attacked. Block attack. Oakes raised an eyebrow. What? From whom? That's a damned good question. He stared up at the ceiling where mics, speakers, and cameras were hidden. So maybe we should ask Black.